Okay, so here's this is the idea that I had about that involves myself, Billie Eilish, Katy Perry, and Jill Schoen. Okay, so it would be a remake of the movie Popcorn with Billie Eilish playing the character that was played by Jill Schoen. Um, I would be starring opposite Billie Eilish, and then I guess Jill Schoen would be producing the movie or directing the movie. And then Katy Perry would be, she would, she would write a whole new album of songs that inspired by the original Popcorn. Now, let me get, okay, so you just have to go out and see the movie Popcorn. It's about this, the guy that burns down a movie theater. I mean, like not a movie theater, but like a theater with, they have plays and stuff like that. And as like kind of like the ultimate like dramatic statement or something like that. And um, he murders his family on stage, and he survives the fire, and so does the Jill Schoen character. He loses like most of the flesh on his body, so he makes these like masks out of human flesh. But in the process, he could actually make these like flesh masks to wear over his, so he could look like anybody he wants with these flesh masks made out of human skin. And so let me get, so that's just kind of like, you have to go out and see the movie Popcorn. Great movie. So here's like, okay, let me give you like, this is like this is the slogan for it. I don't, whatever you call it. Okay. The Possessor. 15 years ago, he murdered his family on stage and burned down the theater. Tonight, he's back for an encore. Popcorn. Buy a bag. Go home in a box. So the movie came out in 1990. Now, what I would also like to feature is, it'd almost be kind of like a Lollapalooza type of thing, because it would also, I would be part of it too. And I would have my own stage. I get up on stage and give a lecture on Grey's Anatomy and give you insight that I have into Grey's Anatomy from what I learned from the book. And in turn, the cast from the show Grey's Anatomy would get up on stage and we'd do like a live performance of like sketches that I wrote that were associated with the television show Grey's Anatomy. So here's my dissertation of the book Grey's Anatomy. Let me go get it. Okay, what I would like to talk about is the human brain. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to find that. What the fuck? Okay, wait, The size of the brain was formerly said to bear a general relation to the intellectual capacity of the individual. Cuvier's brain weighed more than 64 ounces. That of the late Dr. Abercrombie, 63 ounces, and that of Dupuytren, 62 and a half ounces. On the other hand, the brain of an idiot seldom weighs more than 23 ounces. But these facts are by no means conclusive. And it is well known that these weights have been equaled by the brains of persons who never displayed any remarkable intellect. Dr. Haldeman of Cincinnati has recorded the case of a guy at age 45 whose brain weighed 68 and 3/8 ounces. He was never regarded as particularly intelligent. He was illiterate, but is said to have been reserved, meditative, and economical. Dr. Ensner, district medical officer at Port Elizabeth, reports that the brain of Carey, the Irish informer, weighed 61 ounces. M. Nikiforov has published an article on the subject of the weight of brains in the Novosti. According to him, the weight of the brain has no influence whatever on the mental faculties. It ought to be remembered that the significance of the weight of the brain should depend on the proportion that bears the dimension of the whole body and the age of the individual. It is equally important to know what the cause of death for long illness or old age exhausts the brain. To define the real degree of development of the brain, it is therefore necessary to have a knowledge of the condition of the whole body. It is normally lacking. It is usually lacking. The mere record of the weight possesses little significance. The human brain is heavier than that of all the lower animals, excepting the elephant and whale. The brain of the former weighs from 8 to 10 pounds, and that of a whale is a specimen 75 feet long, weighed rather more than 5 pounds. Okay, cerebral, localization, and topography. Physiological and pathological research have now gone far to prove that the surface of the brain may be mapped out in a series of definite areas, each one of which is intimately connected with some well-defined function. And this is especially true with regard to the convolutions on either side of the fissures of Orlando, which are believed by most physiologists of the present day to be concerned with motion, those grouped around the fissure being associated with the movements of the extremities of the opposite side of the body, and those around the lower end of the fissure being related to movements of the mouth and tongue. So those are the muscles involved in cunnilingus. This is not the place nor space can be given to describe these localities. But the two accompanying cuts from Ferrier have been introduced and will serve to indicate the position of the more important areas. The relation of the principal fissures and convolutions of the cerebrum to the outer surface of the scalp has been the subject of much investigation. And many systems have been devised by which one may localize these parts from an examination of the external surface of the head. These plans can only be regarded as approximately correct for several reasons. In the first place, because the relations of the convolutions and sulci to the surface are found to be very variable in different individuals. Secondly, because the surface area of the scalp is greater than the surface area of the brain. So, that lines drawn from one cannot correspond exactly to sulci or convolutions on the other. And thirdly, because the sulci and convolutions in two individuals are never precisely alike. Nevertheless, the principal fissures and convolutions can be mapped out with sufficient accuracy for all practical purposes so that any particular convolution can be generally exposed by removing with the trephine a certain portion of the skull's area. Various landmarks on the outside of the skull, which can be easily felt and which serve as indications of the position of the parts beneath, have already been referred to. And the relation of the fissures and convolutions of these landmarks is as follows. Longitudinal fissure. This corresponds to a line drawn from the glabella to the root of the nose, to the external occipital protuberance. The fissure of Sylvius. The position of the fissure of Sylvius and its horizontal limb is marked by a line starting from a point 1.25 inches horizontally behind the external angular process of the frontal bone to a point 3/4 inch below the most prominent point of the parietal eminence. The first 3/4 inch. Will represent the main fissure, the remaining the horizontal limb. The bifurcation of the fissure is therefore 2 inches behind and almost 1/4 inch above the level of the external angular process. The ascending limb of the fissure passes upward from this point parallel to and immediately behind the coronal suture. Fissure of Rolando. To find the upper end of the fissure of Rolando, a measurement should be taken from the glabella to the external occipital protuberance. The position of the top of the sulcus will be, measuring from in front, 55.6% of the whole distance from the glabella to the external occipital protuberance. Professor Thane adopts a somewhat simpler method. He divides the distance for the glabella to the external occipital protuberance over the top of the head into the two equal parts, and having thus defined the middle point of the vertex, he takes 1/2 inch behind it as the top of the sulcus. This is not quite so accurate as the former method, but it is sufficiently so for all practical purposes, and on account of its simplicity, is very generally adopted. From this point, the fissure runs downward and forward for 3¾ inches, its axis making an angle of 67 degrees with the middle line. Cunningham states that this angle more nearly averages 71.5 degrees. In order to mark this groove, two strips of metal may be employed, one the shorter being fixed to the middle of the other at the angle mentioned. If the lower strip is now placed along the sagittal suture so that the junction of the two strips is over the point corresponding to the top of the furrow, the shorter oblique strip will indicate the direction, and 3¾ inches will mark the length of the furrow. Dr. Wilson has devised an instrument called a cryometer, which combines the scale of measurements for localizing the fissure of the data for the representing its length and direction. Professor Thing gives the lower end of the furrow close to the posterior limb, about a ½ inch behind the bifurcation of the fissure of Sylvius. So that according to this anatomist, a line drawn from a point ½ an inch behind the midpoint between the globule and external occipital protuberance to the spot would mark out the fissure of Rolando. Dr. Reed adopts a different method. He first indicates on the surface the longitudinal fissure and a horizontal limb of the fissure of Sylvius. Part of the infraorbital margin through the middle of the external auditory meatus to the back of the head to the top of the cranium. From the depression in the front of the external auditory, what did I say that right? Meatus, and the other from the posterior border of the mastoid process at its root. He has thus described on the surface of the head a four-sided figure and a diagonal line where it is crossed by the fissure of Sylvius will represent the furrow. Okay.